So today we are doing my last wrap up of 2021, my December reading wrap up, and yeah, it was a pretty varied one. We had pretty much every genre you can think of, from classic to YA contemporary, but that being said, it was my worst reading month of the year in terms of number of books and page count, but it was December, it was busy, yeah. So actually 6 books I'm pretty chuffed with, I'll be honest. So let me give you the breakdown. As usual, we'll do a couple of quick stats at the beginning and then I'll get into a review for each of the books that I read. So as I said, I read 6 books. I don't know if I said that or not. I read 6 books in December and I DNF'd 1. Format wise, I had 3 audiobooks, 2 ebooks and 1 physical book. The DNF was audio. And from that, one of the authors was Black or minority, 1 was translated and 1 was non-fiction. And actually, funnily enough, it was the same book that was by a minority author, and it was translated and it was non-fiction. Page count wise, I read 2,364 pages. And if I break it down by star rating, I had 1 5-star read, 2 4-star reads and 3 3-star reads. So average, fair to middling, as I would say over here in Suffolk. So without any further waffle, let's just crack on, shall we? I'm going to start with the DNF, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because I mentioned it in my my DNF video, which I will link below. But that was The Promise by Damon Galgut. This book just wasn't for me. I really liked the premise. It was a white family in South Africa whose mother, the mother of the family on her deathbed, sort of made her husband promise to give one of their property to the black housemaid. At this time in Africa, it was sort of towards the end of the apartheid and black people weren't allowed to own their own properties. So it was a good premise, but it was just too literary for me. It was just trying to be really smart and I didn't care. So I DNF'd it. So moving on to the books that I did not DNF. The first book I finished in December was The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. If you've seen my Best Books of 2021 Awards video, which if you haven't, go check that out. This was fantastic. I gave it 4 stars, and it was set in ancient Pompeii, and we follow Amara. She was sort of bought and sold in Greece and has ended up in Pompeii in a brothel called the Wolf Den, and it's about her life there, really. What I loved most about this book was you felt like you were in ancient Pompeii. The setting was second to none. Absolutely loved it. Great characters. You follow this group of women in the brothel and they're all really distinct and really 3D, and I really liked them. And then you've got sort of like the rich Roman elite sort of coming into the story in places as well, which was really well done. This is part of a trilogy, and the second book, I can't remember the name of it, I will put it up on screen, comes out in the summer, and I will be pre-ordering that because I really liked it, and I think this series has potential to ramp up to 5-star level. So yeah, highly recommend The Wolf Den if you haven't picked it up yet. It was fantastic. The next book that I finished was a book on audio, and that was The Smell of Other People's Houses by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock. Now, this book was recommended to me by the lovely Gem over at Bookish Gems. If you haven't checked her out, go check her out. She is a delight. She makes me giggle every single video that I watch. She is hilarious. But this book is a YA contemporary set in Alaska, and we follow a cast of characters who are just... It's very slice of life, and you sort of see how their lives crisscross and interact, but they're all distinct. And I really enjoyed this book. It was really easy to follow. It was an interesting sort of setting, being in Alaska, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic. I'm not usually the biggest fan of YA, but I would recommend this one if it floats your boat. Next up was another audiobook. I spent a lot of time on the road in December, and that was Distant Shores by Kristin Hannah. So Kristin Hannah is one of my favourite authors, and I am trying to read all of her work. This is one of her like real early books, and here we're following a married couple. We get the perspective of the wife and the husband as their children have left, they've gone to university, and the wife, well, both the wife and the husband are trying to work out who they are outside of being parents. It's sort of like the empty nest syndrome, what happens when you haven't got to run around and clean bums and wipe noses. I liked the concept. I thought it was quite true to reality. Particularly, I felt I could relate to the female character. Obviously, my kids are still at the bum wiping, snot cleaning stage, so I'm not quite there yet, but I can imagine that I and many other women, when their kids move out, will be like, well, what do I do now? So I really appreciated that. The male perspective was interesting because though I think as a woman you sympathise with the female character, you can sort of see where he's coming from, though sometimes you think, man, you make some shit decisions. But yeah, it was fine. It didn't set my world alight, but it was readable, it was enjoyable enough. Yeah, it was fine, but certainly not one of Kristin Hannah's best, and you could really see that it was one of her earlier works. You know, her characters are good. She's starting to build that into it, but there just wasn't enough meat on the bone, I suppose, for me. The next book I read, another audiobook, was my 5-star of the month, and this was A Rivet in Darkness by Masaju Ishikawa. I can't remember the subtitle for it, something like One Man's Escape from North Korea. So this book follows, this is a non-fiction account of Masaju's life, obviously translated from Korean, and we sort of see him as a child living in Japan with a Japanese mother and a Korean father, which was not the greatest position to be in Japan. Koreans were very much seen almost as interlopers. What I didn't realise was that North Korea and Japan effectively said, I tell you what we'll do, we'll tell them North Korea is amazing, ship them all off there, and then Japan has its problem sorted and North Korea has a load of people to do all its grunt work. So these people are all told that come to North Korea, it is paradise on earth, and Masaju uses that phrase a lot in the book, paradise on earth, and it was really sold to them as this like land of promise and da-da-da-da-da. And they get to Korea and realise that actually the situation is not that different to Japan, in that because they are immigrants from Japan, they are looked down on, they can only reach a certain level in society. It was really eye-opening. I didn't know that much about North Korea before reading this memoir. It's horrific, the lives that they lead there, and how heartbreaking it was for Masaju to go through this, to see what happened to his parents as they moved into old age, and how he tried to have his own family and the difficulties of that. And it was excellent. I would highly recommend, if you want to know more about North Korea. I know there's several books in a similar vein about, and I will be trying to pick those up as well. But yeah, this really hit home for me. It was heartbreaking. I did shed a tear at the end, because it feels like such a hopeless situation, and I suppose in a lot of ways it is a hopeless situation. Yeah, highly recommend. Next up was my only physical book of the month, and that was The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. And I buddy read this with the lovely Becky over at Teacup the Storyteller. Goodness me. Actually, it was really fun to buddy read this with Becky. I didn't particularly like this book. I gave it 3 stars, and I'll go into that in a minute. But actually, sometimes it's quite fun to read a book that you don't like with someone else, because yeah, there was a lot of messages to and forth, like, oh my god, have you read this bit? Look, what is she doing with this? Why has she done that? Why is this happening? So yeah, it was a really fun time. But some of this is my fault. I didn't realise this was a romance novel. I thought this was historical fiction. And I suppose it is historical romance at its core. And we've got 2 timelines. We've got a current day timeline where our main character, Carrie, is writing a story about a failed Jacobite takeover in the early 1700s. And as she moves to Scotland, and she effectively has flashbacks of one of her ancestors, and that's how she writes the book. Love the premise, love the sort of mechanism that she was using, but if you've been here a while, you'll know I am not a massive fan of romance at the best of times. And reading 500 plus pages about a romance, I think I've said before, I don't mind if it's historical fiction with a romance subplot, but this was like full on 90% romance. There wasn't even a good sex scene in this, is what I'm trying to say. It was yeah, it had a lot of coincidences in, which I found really irritating. And also in the current timeline, they kept doing massive historical info dumps in conversations. Oh, let me tell you about this whole section of like history in like a long dialogue. No, it wasn't for me. I gave it 3 stars because it was pretty readable. It wasn't a difficult read. It was a fast-paced read, and it didn't offend me, but it wasn't my jam, and I probably won't pick up any more Susanna Kearsley on the back of this book. And I feel really bad because I think Nikki from Red Dot Reads and Emily from Novell Novels, I think, buddy read this like just before me and Becky, and were raving about it, and I was like, oh, I love what they read, so I'm really going to enjoy it. And then I read it and I was like so sorry guys, one that we disagree on, which particularly for me and Nikki is quite rare because we're usually pretty in tune, but no, this one was not for me. And the last book that I read in December was The Iliad by Homer. I read this with the delightful Eclectic Book Club, hosted by Shelley Swearingen and David Wiley. I am going to do a dedicated video to the Iliad, so that will be coming later on in January. So I won't go too much into detail here, but what I will say is that I'm glad I read it. It did give some context to some of the retellings that I've read in the past. It was an experience, but for me, on an enjoyment level, oh man, there were some real dull bits in this, and I think if I'd have read it outside of the book club, I would have DNF'd it. So yeah, it was an interesting read. I'm glad I've ticked it off like the list, but it was kind of average for me. But like I said, I will go into more detail on that when I do my dedicated video. And yeah, and that, guys, is all I have for you this month, because yeah, as I said, it was a busy month. I didn't get that much reading done. The reading that I did get done was mainly in the car to and from meetings and wrapping presents. So yeah, let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts are, and I will see you again soon, Saturday maybe, with another video. Okay, cheers guys, bye.